Consider you should be able to share.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Avanti. So very good morning to all of you. As Samanthi introduced, I'm Punsulu Kamaragamu. I'll be talking about the evolution and development of democracies in Athens. Before further ado, let's move on to. So as you all know by now, the ancient Greeks established the first democracy. The term democracy is derived from two Greek words that signifies people from demos and rules from kratos. So democracy is the idea that citizens should play an active role in their country's government, either directly or through elected representatives. And furthermore, it promotes that people can change their government through uprising or revolutions. Through peaceful transfers of power rather than through violent uprising or revolutions. So as a result, having a voice is an aspect of democracy. So moving on to Athenian democracy. Athens was the world's first known democracy. Around 50th century, Athens democracy emerged. And it should be noted that Athens democracy did not emerge immediately, but evolved over time through various forms of government. The democracy that we know today evolved from monarchy to an oligarchy and tyranny before arriving at the classical form of Athenian democracy. So many men shaped the Athenian democracy by accomplishments, failings throughout the Greek history. So let's see what are the baby steps or the first steps of democracy in Athens. The establishment of the city-state was responsible for Athenians' transition of city-states, from monarchy to oligarchy. As each city-states become more internally complex, powerful aristocrats began to govern them, shifting power away from one person and into the hands of those control the city-states economically and politically. This procedure excluded the majority, which was the poor. So the masses continued to be socially and economically neglected by the oligarchies, which led to the development of anger among them. Then conflicts among many clans like and populist discontent opened the door for tyranny. Because of tyranny, many of the low classes realized that they had a voice, and they refused to accept the oligarchy's limited assistance. This eventually resulted in the one of democracy. Then moving on to the laws of Draco, during the oligarchy, one of the grievances of the common people was that they were subjected to injustice, as there was no written code of laws to regulate the decisions of the judges. Fearing the outbreak of a popular revolt, Draco, one of the archons, produced the first written law, which gave the publicity to all the old laws and customs. Not only that, but also he created a council of 401 members chosen from all the citizens. Doing so, Draco curtailed the power of individual magistrates to modify their judgment to fit their social official relationships to particular petitioners. So likewise, laws of Draco submitted itself towards democracy. So next, as I mentioned before, there are some key figures who contributed to the evolution and development of Athenian democracy. First, under Solon's reforms, democracy took another significant step forward by easing some of the burden of the poor while not completely undermining the wealthy. He made an effort to balance out various economic situations in order to strengthen Athens. He established class structures that were more centered on economic production and crafted a constitution that did not only belong to wealthy elite by giving the ecclesia more authority and by establishing popular law courts. So practically, every class had a chance to be a part of the decision-making process. Hence, it was said that actually that Solon's rules established the notion that the Athenian state would be directed all working citizens together. Additionally, despite not being a philosophical democrat, Solon was able to eliminate debt slavery and prepared the way for democracy. Next, many of the Solon's rules were continued under Pisistratus, and he actually pushed Athens further into the democracy as the power balance between rich and poor was leveled. He decorated Athens with beautiful public structures and promoted art and literature. Even he established a new festival in the honor of Dionysus, which gave the rise to theater and drama later. He also claimed to have collected a library, which he then opened to the public. Likewise, by establishing religious festivals and public buildings, he weakened the aristocratic power and in the society, and provide all the Athenian people to be equally privileged. Then Cleisthenes, once in power, determined that the Athenian constitution needed to be completely rewritten. So he redistributed power by redistricting Attica geographically. As a result, the Athenians were divided into 10 tribes, which formed the Council of 500, also known as the Pule. These 500 citizens were required to serve in the government for a year. During that year, they were in charge of passing the laws, overseeing all the aspects of political process. When a new law was offered, all the Athenians were given the opportunity to vote on it. Citizens were required to attend the assembly on the day of the vote in order to vote. Additionally, people got the control over the army, as each of the 10 tribes was allowed to elect a general or a strategos as the command of the army. The election by lot provided ordinary people an equal opportunity of holding office alongside the wealthy men. Then ostracism was a further development of democracy brought out by Cleisthenes. This was done in order to discourage future tyrants by having one person elected to be ostracized, as he or she considered a serious threat to the Athenian government. To lessen the threat, they were forced to leave Athens for 10 years. Likewise, Cleisthenes established a direct democracy while attempting to give political equality of all the services. Then democracy advanced further in Athens under the leadership of Pericles. He delegated power to the ecclesia and redefined Athenian citizens. He curtailed the power of court of Areopagus and limited its jurisdiction in the case of homicide. He threw open the archonship to all the cities, to all classes, and made it a paid office. Additionally, the members of the council and the archons were chosen by lot from all eligible citizens. Pericles passed a law providing individuals with regular pay for serving on juries, and it is kind of an effort to encourage all the residents to participate in judicial activities. Even the council members received payments. Hence, the power of the assembly decreased, but the power of the voters grew. So likewise, his reforms, through his reforms, the Athenian government grew more democratic. Then, to sum up, mainly there were three distinct institutions made up Athenian democracy. Namely, there were the Boule, a council of delegates from 10 Athenian tribes, and then the popular law court, where citizens debated their cases in front of a jury chosen by lottery. Then you have ecclesia, a sovereign governing body which established laws and set foreign policies. And as I mentioned before, it should be noticed that democracy in Athens did not emerge overnight. It developed gradually through numerous kind of government before reaching its classical form in Athens. The democracy passed through monarchies, oligarchies, and tyrannies. So throughout Greek history, many men contributed to the shaping the Athenian government by their reforms. As I discussed, the key figures are Solon, Pisistratus, Cleisthenes, and Pericles. So I think you refreshed your memory on the development of Athenian democracy. Over to you, Amanti.
Yes, thank you very much, Punsidu, for that session. If you have any questions about it or any concerns about what Ms. Punsidu spoke of, we can move on to them at the end of the session in the question and answers in that session, in that panel discussion. So we'll move on to the next topic then. The next topic is work and justice, a means to fighting hunger. The idea based on Hesiod's Works and Days. And this lecture will be done by Ms. Erandi Gunawardena. Erandi.
Hi, I'm
over to you.
Hi everyone, a very good morning to all of you. My name is Aranti. And before we get started, let's try to draw on what you already know about works and days, right? So to get started, can you please click on the link that I'm sending you on the chat box? So it's a link for you to put up your ideas, okay? So click on the link and you'll be directed to this page. It's on the chat box. Okay, so I'll give you about a minute or two to click on the link and then you'll be directed to this site, right? So can you see if you can, I'll give you a few seconds to click on the link and open up this site, okay? You can use your phone, right? Or you can use your laptop, either way is fine, okay? But can you see if you can click on the link and join the site? I'll give you a few seconds to do that, okay? And I'll tell you what to do, but just click on the link now. All right, so while you are joining, okay, while some of you I think are still joining, so that's all right. Can you just put up here what you know about Hesiod? What have you learned so far? So we'll try to carry on from there. So you can type here, you can click on this, right? And you can put up your answers here with this @ sign. And don't worry, it's completely anonymous, so we don't know what you typed, okay? So feel free to type anything you know about Hesiod. Okay, I can already see answers coming up, so that's really good, and that's a really good start. So that means you've already started working and studying for your exam, and that's really good. Okay, so I'll give you a few seconds to put up what you know about Hesiod, right? This is excellent, very well studied. So that's absolutely right. So he was a farmer. We can consider him a misogynist. That's true. So he says in another work of his that he is a farmer, right? And we know that he won a poetical contest, so he's known for poetry, right? And then it's said that he met his death with Lucrece, and we consider him as a remarkably consistent man. And that's because he spoke for injustice, honesty, right? He promoted self-reliance, right? So because of these reasons, we consider him a remarkably consistent man, okay? And as you say, he can be called a misogynist, and there are lots of ideas you've shared here which are all true, and that's a very good start, okay? A man of virtues. He was a poet in the 7th and 8th century, yes. So, and he spoke against injustice. So that's what we know, right? That's good. Now let's take a look at what you know about works and days, right? That is one of his very famous works. So what do you know about? It's a didactic work, very good. Discusses the necessity of work and justice, which is the topic we're looking at today, right? Good. Good, this is absolutely right. So we see that why is it a didactic poem? Why do we call it a didactic poem? Because it is written to instruct and inform. And that's again, you're right. It is to instruct Perseus, to address, it's written to address as an address to Perseus, right? And the main themes that we're looking at are justice and work. That's right. So the structure of works and days, so we can categorize work and days to 4 very distinct sections, right? So the first part is an invocation to Zeus, right? So most of the poems that Hesiod wrote is with an invocation, right? Because he always thought that divine intervention is necessary for a poet, okay? And then we can see in section 2, which are the most important lines, and they are also the lines that will help you for this particular topic that we're looking at, right? So lines 11 to 381 talks about the importance of work and justice, and it also gives you a calendar to the farming days, to seafaring, all that, okay? And the next section are about observations, right? And the last section is on the auspicious and inauspicious days, when to get married, and birth omens and all that comes under the last section. So this is how Hesiod has structured his works and days, okay? So our focus today is on work and justice, these lines, right? So Hesiod has two passions. One is the need for justice, and the other is for work, the need for work, right? And he regarded them as two fundamental institutions in the world, okay? So we'll look at why is this necessary? Why are we working, right? Even today, we need to work, right? And those days too, what Hesiod said in the ancient days was that work is important, hard work is important. So these two myths that we're looking at here are important because this is what made people work, right? If you look at the ages that Hesiod gives us, there was a time where it was not necessary for people to work, right? But because what Pandora created, all the evil was let out to the world, and all because Prometheus tried to give fire to mankind. Because of these punishments, right? It was necessary for men to work. So work was something that gods wanted us to do, wanted ancient men of Greek to do. So it's a task that was given by the gods to mankind, right? So that's why it's important to work, right? So to get started, Hesiod says to Perseus, I'm going to tell you the truth, right? So that's important because he's trying to advise Perseus on the truth, nothing else, right? Why Perseus, as we know, he bribed the lords, took his inheritance, right? And he's an idler, he doesn't do his work. So because of all these reasons, Hesiod is writing this poem to tell Perseus the truth, right? Now, before I share some of the quotations that are important to answer this question, can you try to take about a minute or two? Can you put up here any quotations? I think most of you have already done that, and that's really great. I'll give you a few seconds more to put up any quotations that you have already highlighted, that you have already thought that falls under work and justice, the two main themes. Take a minute, okay? And see if you can quickly go through your book and put up any quotations that you think you might use for this question. How work and justice, they're the two main things, how they can help us to fight hunger, right? Any quotations that you know. So take about a few seconds and put anything else that you know. Well done. Okay, that's very good. So when you're studying, this is something important that you should do as well, because when we write answers for literature, you're expected to prove your points. So to prove your points, you should have quotations taken from the text, brainstorm. So when on the day of the exam, these important quotations to prove your points will automatically come to your head, right? So that's one of the ways we can study literature, okay? So the first thing that we see about justice he says it's very straightforward. It says the road to justice is the better way. Okay. And what's going to win at the end is justice, right? And if you're proud, right, you will lose at the end. So it is justice that will take you a long way. So that's why justice is important. Okay. Then he moves on to say, he talks about how important justice is and then brings in about injustice, how these judges, right, are dishonest. They take bribes, which don't you think is very relevant to today's world? You can always take authors, right, that we're looking at and always apply it to what we are going through every day, right? So if the government or if the lords, the people who make rules, right, are dishonest, that doesn't really, that's the main problem, right? So if justice is dragged out of the way by men who judge dishonesty and swallow bribes, then what happens? He says, if we are dishonest, what are the repercussions? That Zeus, the gods, will destroy homes of men, create weeping, and brings harm to crooked men, and the city will not prosper. But if you follow justice, right? If the judges of a town are fair, the city will prosper. Okay, that is very true. Even today, we can always say that if the rulers govern this country justly, or any country, right, there is possibility we can prosper. Okay, and that's exactly what Hesiod says as well, right? And if the judges are not fair, right, then Zeus will mark them out cruel for war. But if they're not, if they follow justice, right, then Zeus will never mark them for war. Okay. And we have the word famine, and we also see that now here, that's how he links it to hunger, how we can fight hunger through justice, right? So if we follow justice, if there's justice in the country, if the judges are, they're not dishonest, right? Zeus will not make us starve, right? There won't be a famine, there won't be anything like that. Instead, the country can prosper. So you can use these quotes and connect it to how you can fight hunger, right? So he goes on to say that now he moves on to work, right? So work is important. Why? Because it's the task of Zeus, right? You have to work, right? And then we can see it says, but mankind has the law of right from him, which is the better way. And if one knows the law of justice and proclaims it, Zeus far-seeing gives one great prosperity. But if a man with knowledge swears an oath, committing perjury and harming right beyond repair, his family will be cursed, right? So if you do not follow the law of justice, you will suffer, right? You will starve, okay? Right. And this is a very important quote that you have also put up and you've recognized. See, you have also, that's a very good quote that you can take for this particular question that we're looking at. Work till hunger becomes your enemy. And Hesiod says, you have to work, right? It is through hard work that you can live happily, right? So it's the satisfaction that you get, inward satisfaction, and it also to prosper that you have to work, and then hunger will not be a problem. Okay. And now we see here how important work is, right? And it says in work, there is no shame. Shame is in idleness. So if you do not work, you become a lazy man, right? And you begin to envy your wealth, right? And no matter what your luck, to work is better. So turn your foolish mind from other men's possession to your own. right? So if you want to be a rich man, a wealthy man, right, and fight hunger, you should work hard, you should work better, okay, and not either, right? Now, the point that we started with, it is mentioned in these lines. It says, you foolish persons, go to work. The gods have given work to men. Okay, so it is God's task to man to work, to live happily, and to fight hunger, right? And not to put work off until another day, right? So what Hesiod is saying, the means or how you can, if you follow hard work, and if you follow justice, it's possible for us to fight off hunger. Okay, and that's those are the two pieces of advice that we see on Hesiod's works and days. Okay, right, now take about a second and see if you can put up your answer to how you can use work and justice to fight hunger. So take about a minute and put your answer here. So that wraps up our session, right? So that's how you can study for this question. You have to go through your book, see what exactly Hesiod says about work and justice, and apply it to how you can fight off hunger. Okay, now I'll give you a second to put up your answer here. I think most of you have done that, right? It's dishonesty, honesty, good not to anger the gods, because the moment you anger the gods, you won't be able to fight hunger. Why? Because the gods ruin your life, in other words, right? Good. And this is excellent. Very good. Right. Any other questions that you have in how you can fight hunger through work and justice? Anything that you want to ask apart from what we discussed? Okay. So if there is anything else that you want to ask after the session, so feel free to keep those questions and ask them at the end of or during our QA session. Okay. Right, thanks a lot. And thanks for putting up your answers here. So that means you've already started studying, and it's also never too late, right? So you can always start studying now, right? And focus on the topics because they give you an area for you to focus on apart from all these areas that we are looking at, right? So all the best, and I'll see you back in another session, and I'll hand over to Amanti.
Right. Yeah, thank you very much, Andy, for that very interactive session. All right, then we'll move on to the next one, which will be done by me. And this would be major wars of Greece, that is the Persian and the Peloponnesian War. Give me a minute to share the screen. Okay. All right. So the topic is the Persian and the Peloponnesian War. But as you know, it's a really, really big topic, and there are two very vast scopes of history. So what I will be doing is to look at these two wars from the angle of what can you learn from it and what might you need for your exam. So I'm not going to cover the two wars step by step. I'm not going to go through every battle and every incident, but just to touch on the main turning points of both the wars and some of the key information or key points. So I'll jump straight to it. First of all, we'll start with the Persian Wars. So when we talk about the Persian Wars, one thing that we have to, is, you know the sequence, right? You know how it happened, the burning of Sardis that angers the Persians, and then they retaliate by attacking Greece. But then, before all of that, first let's look at the Greeks who are settled in Asia Minor. What kind of people are these? So if you look at the mainland Greeks, the Spartans, Corinthians, Athenians, they have this strong sense of nationality, patriotism. But when it comes to the Greeks of Asia Minor, we know that they are a product of colonization that happens. You study colonization also. So why they move over to the other side of the sea is for commerce and trade mainly. So while they did have rulers, Greek rulers and Greek laws and all of that, and I'm sure they were patriotic and all of that, it was true. their sense of nationality was not as strong as those in the mainland Greece. So imagine this as you migrating to another country. So you go there, you won't have voting rights, you won't have political rights, but you can settle there, you can have your own place and your own life, you can earn and you can live a good life. So the same thing was happening to the Greeks of Asia Minor, where they were first conquered by the Lydians and then the Persians, but they were allowed to be free. They could do their trade and live without a problem. Only thing, they had to pay a tribute and they had to contribute to the army when there were wars, when they were called for. So in that setting, the Greeks were okay, the Asiatic Greeks, they were fine. But then we have this little thing called the uprising of Naxos. So these are the Cyclade Islands. I hope you are familiar with the Ionian Revolution and the uprising in Naxos. So even in this situation, what we have to think about is, Mukherjee says, there were some exiled nobles who were creating trouble in Naxos. So these exiled nobles happened to be oligarchs. There was a democratic uprising in Naxos, and some of the oligarchs get expelled. They come back and they create some trouble. So when you look at that tiny instance, we can see that the same issue that Punsilu at the very beginning talked about, the democratic transition of Athens, this had been happening in Naxos and other places as well. So when we look at democracy, we can see that had been struggling along the way. That is Naxos and the Ionian Revolution, at least the first part of it, is another example for this. Not the Ionian Revolution, the uprising in Naxos. And then you know what happened. Oligarchs ask help from Aristogoras, who asked help from Aristophanes, the satrap, the Persian satrap. So then we think of, why do these two people, why would a Persian want to help the Greeks? Or why would Aristogoras, the tyrant of Miletus, want to help the Greeks, want to help this exiled bunch of nobles? Again, we come to the answer, because of political advantages. They wanted to use this opportunity as a means of getting hold of all of Cycladic islands. And that is why they came up and they tried to help. But we know that there is a falling out, at the end of which Aristogoras initiated the Ionian Revolution to kind of stand against the Persians. Again, it was Aristogoras' personal problem, not a problem of the Cycladic islands or the mainland Greeks. So this was like, he was panicking. He had angered the Persians. Now he couldn't stand on his own. So he get all these islands to revolt against Persia just to save his skin. However, we end up with the Ionian Revolution. And then we know that only Athens and Eretria go to help the Ionian Greeks, right? We know that Sparta does not. So why does that happen? If Greeks are in trouble, why didn't all of Greece go and help? So let me give you a little example for this question through this. I hope you're following the war in Ukraine. So why is US helping Ukraine? It's so far away. Looks like it's none of the problems, right? But we know that there are political perks. We know there are other perks, commercial and otherwise, which is why our US, which is all the way on the other side of the globe, comes over to help Ukraine. So this is exactly what happens with Athens and Eretria also. The Asiatic Greeks are also Ionian Greeks. So they have that ethnic bond. And there is also advantage of, there's a political advantage of being close to these people, and these people's autonomy, their independence from Persia, matters to Eretria and Athens. So they come over and they help, and we know what happened. There's the burning of Sardis. So one thing about Sardis, in this map you can see it. Sardis, when you study Alexander the Great, you'll see that Persia does not have just one capital. There are few. There's Susa, Sardis, Babylon. There are few key points of the empire because it's a huge empire, Persepolis. So Sardis is one and the closest to the Asiatic Greeks. And it is this one that the Greeks burn, not in the heart of Persian Empire, right? Being that clarified. So this is why the Asiatic Greeks come over, the mainland Greeks come over to help the Ionian Revolution and trigger the Persians to retaliate against the mainland Greeks. So this is touching on the background, some key points of the background for the war. Moving on to the first part, we know that it is a very unsuccessful expedition because the naval part of the expedition gets cut off at Mount Athos. So the army can't continue without the navy. because the navy was bringing in most of the supplies, and this is a long distance from home for the Persians, so they couldn't really sustain. They couldn't be sustained without the navy, so they drove back. And then we come to the second part of the war, which is the big Battle of Marathon happens. So we know that before the beginning of the war, Persians asked for earth and water. This is the ancient token of submission. And if you all have watched 300, I hope you have. It's a good movie, but not 100% historically accurate. We can see that Leonidas pushed this Persian to a well. So there are two fun trivia about it. Leonidas did not do this. It was done before Leonidas, long time ago, when Darius sent it, not Xerxes. And also, funny enough, Athens also did that. Athens also put the Persian delegate into a crime pit that they have for criminals. So both Athens and Sparta did this. But the movie captures it in the second expedition under Leonidas, which is not true. Anyway, the point is, Sparta and Athens, they refused to send earth and water, but some of the states did. So my next question is, or next point of discussion should be, why did some send it and why didn't? So why did the northern states of Greece agree to submit to the Persian control when Sparta, Athens, and some of the lower states, like middle and southern Greek states, refused to? So if you really think about it, the map of Greece, I'll go back to this one. Can't really see. Okay, I hope you can remember the map of Greece. The northern states are the closest to the Persian invasion, and if they're the most vulnerable. So Thrace, Macedonia, they submitted to the Persian control, not because they like it, but because it was a game of survival. Whereas for Sparta and Athens, they had the luxury of saying no to this because they were further down, and they could fight when the Persians arrived. And then we go to the Battle of Marathon, the iconic Battle of Marathon. So you know what happens in Marathon. Athenians defeat the Persians single-handedly, or almost single-handedly, with a little bit of help from Plataea. So when we look at this also, first thing is, why Marathon? Right? So we know that Persians, this time, learning from their first mistake, they don't come all the way here. I hope you can see my cursor. Yeah. They came across the Aegean Sea and landed here, and they destroyed Eretria. So Eretria and Athens helped destroy Sardis. So Persians come and destroy Eretria. So one part of the vengeance scheme is done. Then they want to attack Athens. And they sail from Eretria all the way and land at Marathon. So the Athenians think, rather than waiting for the Persians to come to your doorstep, we should go and fight them at Marathon. Because by any chance, if they lose the battle, they still have a second battlefront, right? They can go back to Athens and defend Athens. But if they wait for the Persians to come to Athens, then if they lose the battle, the entire city is destroyed. This actually happens in the third part of the war, if you remember. So that is why they select Marathon as the plane of the battle. And at Marathon, so we know that Athenians very strategically place their troops and they defeat the Persians. And the Persians round back to Athens. They do come to Athens, Athenian coast, but Athenians quickly go back to Athens and defend their coast as well. And this brings the expedition, the second expedition, to an end. So I hope you go through the little details. Like I said, I don't have the time to go through each and every step. But let's look at the importance of the battle. Why is this battle seen as this legendary, really big deal? The first thing is, Athenians overstepped the Spartans. So after this point, Sparta was seen as this military leader of Greece. But then Athens steps in, they defeat this huge empire, and now they are the leaders. So people started wondering, do we really need Sparta anymore? We have the contestant, Athens. The second one is, Athenians showed that they were capable of destroying this quote-unquote immortal or unstoppable army. Again, if you have seen the movie, you would have seen the immortals. They're really, they're really intimidating, this really big group of soldiers, and they were thought to be unstoppable. But Athenians, by defeating this unstoppable army, one, it helped their morals. Two, it showed that Persia can be defeated. And is an actual painting of this situation. And then it also gave Athenians this morale to keep fighting and keep building their state into something bigger. So I brought this from the Ukrainian situation. They were out, I hope you are in touch with the current war. I'm bringing this because this is something we can see it's happening and you can relate. And this is kind of history repeating. So Ukrainians were completely outnumbered at the beginning, but they never gave up. And that kind of sent a whole level of morale across the whole state, right? I'm talking about the initial stages of war. So something similar happened in Athens as well. And then finally, this was their first step towards supremacy. It gave them the belief that they can be supreme, and from their own, they built up their state up until they became an Athenian empire, not a state. So then moving on to the intersection between the second and third, which was 10 years period. So like I said, marathon became the first step towards the empire, but you can't just, sit around. You have to build the empire. So what did Athens do between these two wars that made her an empire at the end of the third invasion? First thing they did, this was led by Themistocles, as you know, was to build a navy. So Themistocles very rightly identified that whoever controls the sea can control the Greek world. Why is that? Because the sea, the Aegean Sea, it controls the economic, it has a lot of economic networking that's happening in that Mediterranean area. So if you can control the economics, that's a lot of money coming in, that's a lot of power. That's one. And then Persians, more importantly, Persians had a navy, a very strong navy. And if you were to fight Persians successfully, you also need an equally strong navy. So one would be economic supremacy. Actually, two would be economic supremacy. First reason would be to fight the Persian navy. And then by that point, the most strongest navy was at Corinth, and Athens and Themistocles, they built up something equal or maybe most strong as well. And they used the money from Laurium to make this navy. So they could have used the money from Laurium to, I don't know, beautify the city or something else, but no, they thought we'll put this money into something that that can give us supremacy at the end of this scheme. So Themistocles suggested it, Aristides refused it, and we know that he got ostracized. Something I want to note here is how ostracism, which was introduced by Cleisthenes that Punsido mentioned previously, how that works. This is a living example or a perfect example of how ostracism worked in the democracy, the fight between Themistocles and Aristides. Moving on to the third Persian invasion. I know I'm moving really fast because we have two huge wars to cover. So moving on to the third Persian invasion, again we have three major battles: Thermopylae, Salamis, Mycale, and then Plataea. So let's start with the beginning. What happens at the very beginning? So when the third Persian war was being planned by the Persians, the invasion, the Greeks also got to know about this, and they get together at the Isthmus of Corinth. So this is, if you are again familiar with military history, you'd see whenever there's been a huge war, World War I, II, whatever, usually the big powers, they come together and they have a discussion. Okay, what are we going to do? A similar thing happened here in Greece as well. They all came to Isthmus of Corinth and they started planning how to retaliate if the Persians do attack. And then they thought, okay, we'll defend Thermopylae. Why? I'll come to that in a minute. And then they said, we'll give leadership to Sparta. So a few minutes ago, I said, people started wondering whether Sparta is needed, that Athenians became, leader. But here we can see quite interestingly, during the third Persian invasion, Sparta is still made the leader. So maybe her initial reputation as a leader, it still prevails, even though Athens is also now powerful. And they also decided to put all their domestic disputes on hold for a while. So when you open your Mukherjee, in the first page, it says, Greece is a divided country, divided by mountains physically and politically divided also. But this situation, the third Persian invasion, is one of the very few examples, or close examples, to a situation where Greeks actually forgot these internal disputes and came together to defend their state. So that also, if you note it down as one of the instances, if you get a question, were they always divided? you can give this as a count argument, not always, sometimes they came together. This is one. And then moving on to the Battle of Thermopylae. So again, if you've watched 300, you'd see this in very graphically represented. So why Thermopylae? You can see in this map, Thermopylae is further up north. So since Thrace, Macedonia has already surrendered to the Persians, there won't be resistance. They will come all the way, and Thermopylae is at the entrance of the central Greece. So if you want to save all the cities in central and southern Greece, the first point to cut off the Persians would be Thermopylae. So it would be an ideal location to block off the enemy. Secondly, I have put this is a reconstruction because of sea erosion. This has changed now. But if you look at the picture at the bottom of the screen, you can see that it's a very narrow stripe. So the Persian army is huge, and the Greek army, give me 1 second. Sorry about that. So the Persian army is huge, but the Greek army is small. So, and you know, they fight facing each other. So this was a perfect space to limit the Persian huge force, because even though it's huge, only around 10 can fight at a time. So their numbers will not matter. So which is why they chose Thermopylae. Before that. So, and then let's move on to the last part of Thermopylae, where Ephialtes has already betrayed the Persians, the Greeks, and then 300 Spartans are left. So we know that this incident, the Spartans standing on their own, becomes again a very legendary situation, right, in history. To look at it very realistically, why did the Spartans say just for cinematic effects? No, they stayed for two reasons. One, for Spartans to leave the battlefield, because, you know, with lycagon reforms and lycagon training, for them to die while fighting was the honorable way out. Not to live to fight another day. That wasn't their philosophy. For them, dying while fighting was the way to go. So they stayed back. But more importantly, they stayed back to buy the other Greeks enough time to withdraw to another location and defend the Greeks. So that's why we have Leonidas leading the 300 Spartans to stay and fight at Thermopylae to buy the other Greeks some time to fall back. Moving on to the next battle of Salamis. So here, this actually gives the answer to one of the first questions I asked. Why did Thrace and Macedonia did not stand with the Greeks? Why did they surrender to the Persians? Battle of Salamis, when you look at the historical flow of events, you'd see that when Thermopylae fell, instead of defending the next closest position, all of the Peloponnesians, they rushed all the way back to Isthmus of Corinth, and they started defending the Isthmus of Corinth. Or at least they tried to. So what happens there is all the northern states, like Thebes, Athens, all of them will be open. So if they run from here all the way to here, you'd see all of these people will be destroyed by the Persians, right? So you can see how selfish that policy and the move is. So this is probably why Thrace and Macedonia realized that they do this and anyway surrender to the Persians before anything happened. So anyway, the plan was Peloponnesian army, they wanted to come all the way and defend this point, which was the next narrowest point. But Themistocles, as we know, tricked the Persians into fighting at Salamis. Again, why Salamis? The importance of the Battle of Salamis is, again, it was a very narrow strait, and when all the Persian ships got into the strait, they were huge, they were large in number, they got stuck. Whereas the Athenian, Spartan, and the allied navies, which were smaller in number and smaller in size, they could maneuver this place quite efficiently, and they ended up destroying most of the Persian ships. And even the Persian ships, they kept bumping into each other, they couldn't turn around, so they were like easy targets, and they got destroyed. So again, we can see the Greeks using the same technique that they used at Thermopylae, the narrow pass situation, but this time in sea. And then moving on to Battle of Plataea, which is the third and the final battle inside the mainland Greeks. So in the Battle of Plataea also, I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty. If you look at the main important things about Plataea. First one is, we know that Athens threatened to side with the Persians because Athens was open. We know after Thermopylae, Athens is completely destroyed, right? It was burned to the ground. And then Persians threatened to do the same again. And they tell Athenians, you join us and help us, and then we'll let you rebuild the city. That was the Persian deal. Athenians say, no, we will not betray Greeks. But and they were hoping the Spartans would come and help them. But no, the Spartans don't come. So there's this whole fiasco that's happening. Finally, Athens threats Sparta, saying, if you don't help us, we will side with the Persians. So the important part here is when Athens said that, Sparta quickly goes and helps Athenians. That shows how important a part Athens played in the history of Greece and how important their support, the side that they support, was in this war. So the third battle happens in Plataea. Again, the Greeks win the battle, and with that, the expedition to Greece come to an end. However, we also have one last battle at Mycale, which happens in the other side, in the Aegean, across the Aegean Sea. The importance of this battle is after this battle, the Persian control over the Asia Minor Greeks also subside. So with Plataea, the Persian control in the mainland Greece subside. With Mycale, the same happens to the Asiatic Greeks on the other side of the Aegean Sea. So at the end of the Persian War, therefore, we have all of Greeks, mainland and Asiatics. So mainland is completely free of Persian control. Asiatics are, to a certain extent, free from the Persian control. With that, we have the Persian War coming to an end. So if I briefly walk you through the results of the war for Greeks, there was deliverance from the Persian control, and Athenians emerged as a leader. For the Persians, they lost part of their empire, mainly the part in the Asia Minor region, and their attempt at Greece to expanding, that also failed. So if you look at I'll quickly go through the causes of failure. One cause of Persian failure was the distance. They had to go a long way and the unfamiliar territory. Second was equipment and training. We are told that the Greeks had better equipment and they had better training than the Persians. This could be because Persian army was mostly mercenaries, so there was no national level training. They would be paid soldiers. Whereas for Greeks, there was national level training, at least for Spartans. So better in that sense. And motivation and morale, the Persians were just expanding an empire. The Greeks were fighting for their lives. So again, I brought the famous Russia-Ukraine example. Russian soldiers are known for low morale. Ukrainian soldiers are known for high morale because Ukrainians are fighting for their lives, whereas Russia is fighting to expand an empire. These are examples you can see happening right now. So with that, we come to the end of the Persian Wars. I know it was rather fast, so if you have questions, we'll discuss it at the end. And let's move on to the Peloponnesian War. So again, this is a huge section, so I'm going to cram it into hopefully 20 minutes. So first, why did it start? The causes. First is jealousy of Sparta. So after the Persian War, Athens with the Delian League, it expands into a huge empire, and Sparta is jealous. And then with the expanding empire, with Periclean imperial policy, the allies are not very happy. Of course, like you can relate to this. British Empire, we were subjects, we weren't happy, right? Because of the control, because of the taxation and all the other forms of control, allies were discontent. So if you wanted to have a fight with Athens, there were a lot of people to cheer you on. And finally, there was the commercial competition between Athens, Corinth, Megara. All these people were fighting for the commercial supremacy of the Mediterranean Sea. So even though Corinth was not an ally or a tributary ally of Athens, she was also mad with Athens because Athens was threatening her commercial supremacy. So overall, there was a lot of people that didn't like Athens. And there was overall discontent amongst all of Greece against this one state, which is also the supreme state at the time. But then just being jealous or mad about someone is not enough reason to start a war. So what happens at the, okay, this is just another parallel. I hope you remember Carthaginian Wars, Punic Wars, which we'll discuss at a later point as well. The same thing happened between Rome and Carthage, right? Rome and Carthage, the basic cause for the war was supremacy of the Mediterranean seas. And then again, I wrote in the Ukrainian example. So let's look at the immediate cause. So this I'll go through a little slow because it's a little complex. A bunch of exiled nobles, again, does this ring any bells? Naxos had the same situation, right? So we have the same thing here with Epidamnus. A bunch of exiled nobles started harassing Epidamnus. And Epidamnus is a colony of Corcyra, which is a colony of Corinth. So Corinth is the main city. Corcyra is a colony of Corinth. And Epidamnus is a colony of Corcyra. Okay, so we have have a mental picture of the three flow. So Epidamnus just goes to her mother city and says, we need your help, but Corcyra says no. Corcyra does not agree to help. Then Epidamnus goes and asks help from Corinth. And Corinth agrees to help. And when Corinth agrees to help, for some reason, Corcyra gets angry. And I mean, it's not just anger. This is a fight for supremacy, right? So Corcyra attacks the Corinthian ships that were coming to help Epidamnus. So now Corinth is really angry, and Corinth is a bigger and a stronger city than Corcyra. So after attacking, Corcyra panics, worrying that she won't be able to handle Corinth on her own. So Corcyra goes and asks help from Athens. Athens at this point is the strongest naval power, the only one that can counter Corinth. Okay. So Athens agrees to help. Again, she wants to expand her empire. She wants to spread her power. So she says, okay, I'll help Corcyra. But when Athens agreed to help Corcyra, Corinth gets mad, obviously, right? Because Athens had nothing to do with this. So Corinth goes and helps the Athenian ally, a tributary ally, Potidaia, to revolt. Corinth supports it. But then after this, Corinth panics, thinking, okay, now what if Athens attack us? We can't count Athens on our own. So why don't we go and ask Sparta, who is the rival of Athens? So now Sparta agrees to help Corinth. Athens has agreed to help Corcyra. And somehow Athens and Sparta finds themselves as opponents in a war that they had nothing to do with at the beginning. So I hope this section, usually it's a little complex, so try to draw a map in your mind. At the end of the day, what actually happens is Athens and Sparta now find themselves as opponents in a war that initially started as a war between Epidamnus and Corcyra. So this is the beginning of, this is the immediate cause for the Peloponnesian War. So I'll jump to the first phase of the war. Again, I'm going to touch on some of the main things, only the main points. So first important point of the first phase is Periclean war strategy, which is not to engage Sparta on land. Pericles refused because Pericles knew Athens is not as strong as Sparta on land. They are strong on in sea, but not on land. So this is a key point. And then the second most important thing that happens in the first phase is the plague of Athens. So you know that during the plague of Athens, so what happens is Pericles, with the war strategy, he puts everyone inside the walls, the city walls, and close it off. So everyone is inside. Sparta comes, there's no one to fight. They just destroy the countryside and they go. But because it's a huge population, a plague starts and it catches very fast. I mean, we also COVID, we know how fast plagues can go. So the same thing happens, and in this case, in a congested environment. So it said 1/3 of the Greeks Athenians died in the plague, including Pericles. So the plague of Athens is important, one, because of the huge loss of lives, which is also manpower if you're talking about it in a war context, and also the loss of their statesmen. Pericles was the guiding light of Athens, and he also died in the plague. So the first part of the war wasn't going well for Athens. And then, however, amidst all of these difficulties, we have the siege of Spactria. So siege of Spactria is important. It's a victory for Athens. It's important that way. But also it's important as one of the very few instances where Sparta actually surrendered. We know Spartans don't surrender. I previously said for them, dying fighting is the way to go. But here, siege of Spectria is one of the few instances they actually surrender to the Athenians who were besieging them. Read Mukherjee closely. It's a lot of, we know that Spartans were going to attack Athenians, but a second army comes and besieges Spartans. Anyway, the importance of the battle or the siege is the surrender of the Spartans. And then finally, we have Battle of Delium. So Spartans never surrender, and when they do, Athenians got really elated with the success that they forgot the most important thing that Pericles said, which was never to engage the Spartans on land. Elated with their success, Athenians engage the Spartans on land, leading to the Battle of Delium, and they are completely destroyed. So Battle of Delium puts Sparta back in power, in a sense, of the land area, and Athens is lost. And then with that loss, we come to the Peace of Nicaea. Again, just to touch on the important parts of Peace of Nicaea, Brasidas. So this is the reason why Peace of Nicaea becomes possible. So when you read Mukherjee, you will see that it says, Cleon and Brasidas were strong advocates of war. And when they die, everyone agrees to have a peace. So you can see how much control these generals have had in the decisions that were made, even though Athens was a democracy. Okay, and when we talk about WASPs, we'll talk about Cleon as a demagogue, a sophist, a speaker and a demagogue, and the control that he had. This would be tomorrow. And then, so in the Peace of Nicaea, there was a pact for 50 years of peace. So everybody was tired of war, they wanted peace. But it wasn't going to happen. Within a few months' time, the second phase start. Yeah, okay. So when we look at the second phase of the war, again, let's look at the most immediate point of recognition. That is the Argive League. So Argive League is important. If you remember your first lessons of Greek history, you can see before Sparta became superpower of Peloponnesus, Argos was the superpower of Peloponnesus. So when Sparta and Athens get together, their allies get really upset about it, and they now want a different leader. So what does Argos do? Now she sees her opportunity, steps in and says, let's gather together and make an Argive League, not a Peloponnesian League under Sparta, but an Argive League under us, that is Argos. And funnily, what Athens does is, so now there's a body against Sparta. They're like, you know what, we'll just go and join this other group of people who hate Sparta too. The funny thing is, they've already agreed to 50-year peace with Sparta at this point. But because of the persuasion of demagogues, they go and join this Argive League. And then with that, we have the Battle of Mantinea, in which Sparta completely destroys the Argive League and regains her position. So once she regains her allies, Athens is isolated once again. Moving on to the Sicilian expedition, again, it's a lot of details, so please read the book carefully. I'll touch on the main parts. So first thing is, why did it happen? Again, there's a lot of background reasons, political reasons, imperial ambitions of Athens to go and attack and conquer Sicily, and commercial perks of having Sicily, because Sicily is in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. But the immediate cause is a problem with Segesta, Selinus, Syracuse, and there was a problem with the Sicilian states, and then Athens and Sparta end up as supporters of two states, Syracuse and Segesta. So if you really look at this situation, it sounds very familiar to the first reason why the war started, where Poseidon and Corinth had a problem and Sparta and Athens ended up helping and being at war with each other, except same thing happens in Sicily with different cities. So again, history repeating in a sense. And then if you look at the overall expedition, we know that Athens failed miserably. Let's look at why Athens failed. Why did Sicilian expedition fail for Athens? Again, go through the smaller battles. I'm just jumping to the end. One thing is not clarifying Segesta's ability to pay. So at the end of Sicilian expedition, Athens became bankrupted. And as a state, we went through a crisis, right? So we know how it works. As in, we know the constraints of a country. So when Athens was having this crisis, they could not sustain their empire, and that really affected their imperial position. So the Sicilian expedition was one of the key reasons why this happened also. So the problems or the mistakes they did was not clarifying. Segesta promised to pay for the expedition, but they could not, so they didn't clarify. That led them into economic rabbit hole. And then they had three commanders. They had Alcibiades, Lamachus, and Nicias. So when you have three people with three different objectives and three different agendas and ideas, you can't really lead a single project, right? There's too many cooks spoiling the soup. And then they recalled Alcibiades for personal reasons back to Athens, right in the middle of it. So as much as Alcibiades was a demagogue and known as a scrupulous person, he was also the most competent general. So having him recalled in the middle of the war was the next mistake Athens did. And abandoning the wall that was built across Sicily. So Lamachus and Nicias, they were building a wall across Sicily, cutting off Syracuse. They were almost at the verge of winning the war. And then Nicias, for the winter, he stops all the work. And using this as an opening, Gylippus, the Spartan commander, moves to Syracuse and then regains the control. So abandoning the wall, recalling Alcibiades, not clarifying the economic situation, not assessing it properly, and having three commanders, these made Athens fall in the Sicilian expedition. And the Battle of the Great Harbor, we know that a lot of religious reasons. Nicias was superstitious, and therefore he couldn't leave the place, and the whole army got destroyed there. Moving on to the third and last part of the war, I'll just jump in. So we know Persians come back, and Alcibiades also come back from the other side in this part. And we know that to recall Alcibiades, Samos plays a huge role, the island of Samos, and the generals of Samos. So why would Samos have such control to recall and expel Alcibiades? Remember, this is a war situation, and Samos was a military headquarters, and it had generals. So the generals during the time of war had a lot of control or a voice, and they could persuade the mainland Athenians to recall Alcibiades back to Athens, even though at this point he was branded as a traitor. And the next interesting thing about this part is the alliance of Persia and Sparta. I have not put the name, so this is Sparta, Persia. This is Athens. So Persia, remember, Persia was an enemy for Sparta and Athens. But now Persia is in line with Sparta. So why this happens again? Perks, right? I put again a recent picture here for you to relate, because this is something that's happening right now in the world. There were perks for Sparta because Persia had the money, Persia had the numbers, the army and the navy, and Persia could expand. They failed once to expand over to Greece, and now they had another chance. So both had perks, and they decided to get together and stand against Athenians. And Persia also had a thing against Athens, right? Because Athens was a key role in defeating them the first time. So anyway, the Persian involvement had a lot of commercial reasons behind it, as well as political and imperial ambitions. And then if you look at the third part, overall and missteps of Athens. So again, why did Athens fail in this part? Rejection of peace. So when, again, if you look at the steps closely, there's a lot of battles. And at the Battle of Argonosi, Sparta is badly defeated. And they ask for peace, they sue for peace, which Athens, led by demagogues, refuse. So we'll talk about demagogues with Aristophanes later, but they had a lot of control in the democratic setting. And then again, they switch commanders from Alcibiades to Conon. Doesn't this sound very familiar? It's pretty much what happened with Sicilian expedition also, right? Too many commanders in a very short period of time. And then leaving the fleet at Aegospotami unattended. Conon leaves the fleet unattended, Spartans take it over, and with the fleet gone, Athens doesn't have people to fight with, so the war comes to an end. So if you look at these steps, some of them sound very repetitive. The same mistakes that were done previously were done again by the Athenians. For example, leaving the fleet unattended, leaving the wall unfinished. sounds very similar, right? Similar mistakes leading to the Athenian downfall. And if you look at the results of the war at the end of it, the main thing is Athenian imperial policy comes to an end. She is bankrupted. She does not have an army or the navy, and she has lost almost all her good generals in the war. Nicias, Lamachus, Alcibiades, all of them are gone. As in, not all of them are dead, but either they are dead or they are gone from the state. They're removed from their positions, and they also had to pay a huge indemnity, like a penalty on top of the economic crisis. So Athenians, who were one of the most wealthiest nations at the beginning of the war, starts crumbling at this point. And Sparta kind of regains her supremacy, and then this leads to a brief Spartan supremacy thereafter. So this brings this discussion to an end. I know I rushed and I only touched on the most important parts because it's a huge scope. So, but these are some parts that you will need. You can use to write your answers. You can use these for several ways. You can turn it around and use them in several ways. We'll talk about, if you have questions, we'll talk about it at the end. Yeah, so with that, the first session comes to an end. Sorry, not the first session, first half of the first session comes to an end. So we'll go for a little break here and we'll meet with the second half of the session. So during the break, I'll play a very small video which introduces you to the Department of Classical Languages at the University of Peradeniya. We hope to see you here at a future date. So to give you a glimpse into what we have here, I'll show you a very small video and then we'll have a 10-minute break and reconvene. So I'll play the video now. I think there's a connection. So let me reshare it again. All right, so we'll move on to a 10-minute break and we'll reconvene at 9:40. All right. Hope you had a small break. So let's move on to the next session, next part of the session. And this would be, the topic would be Philip of Macedon and Alexander the Great, two of the most important persons we find in history. And this would be done by Ms. Consider. Consider, over to you.
Thank you, Amanti. So hello back again. Hello, everyone. So I'll be talking about two kings of Macedonia, under which I'll be talking about Philip of Macedon and Alexander the Great. So as you can see, I'll be starting with Philip of Macedon and moving on to Alexander the Great. So Philip of Macedon, he was the youngest son of Amyntas III, who had three sons. In his early age, he witnessed the dissolution of Macedonian kingdom as his brothers, Alexander the Great and not Alexander the Great, but Alexander the Second and Perdiccas III, struggled with the intervention of Thebes and the inventions by the Illyrians. He even had been held captive at Thebes for 3 years, starting around 300 to 67 BC. Eventually, his brother Perdiccas was able to free him. During this time, he had seen the sacred band, the incredible effective Theban wedges, and the abilities of their renowned commanders, Epaminondas and Pelopidas. On his return, his older brother Perdiccas was killed while fighting with the Illyrians along the northern Macedonian border. Since the oldest brother Alexander II was also dead, Philip was made regent for his nephew, Amyntas IV. However, he assumed the Macedonian throne by himself at the age of 23 in the year 359. His first priorities was to secure Macedonia's borders and reconstruct the army. His main rivals were the Illyrians, whom he eventually defeated, and the Thebans. The Athenians, who not only control the local gold and silver mines, but also supported a rival for Macedonian throne. So he completely reorganized Macedonian army based on his experience. For example, its size was expanded from 10,000 to 24,000, and the cavalry was increased from 600 to 3,500. And here it was a professional army instead of one made up of citizen warriors. So additionally, he organized a team of engineers to produce towers and catapults as siege weapons. He gave in uniforms and demanded an oath of loyalty to the monarch, so that each man would have a feeling of togetherness and solidarity. So in other words, so each soldier would no longer be loyal to a specific town or a region, but true exclusively to the king. So after that, he transformed the traditional Greek phalanx by giving each unit its own commander to improve communication. And he switched from the hoplite spear to the sarissa, which you can see here. It is a 18 to 20 foot pike that had the advantage of reaching above the opposition's considerably shorter spear. In addition to this spear, a new helmet and modified shield. Each man carried a small double-edged blade for close in combat. So following his army's reorganization, he created Pela, welcoming poets, writers, and philosophers. He even requested Aristotle to instruct Alexander, his son. It should be noted that in order to ensure that neighbors would not attack, he invited his son, their sons to Pela to be educated, as well as they were held kind of hostages. So here his rationale was sound, and it shows how he tried to safeguard his country, Macedonia. Then in 350, Paeonia and convincingly destroyed the Illyrians in a fight. And the following year, his marriage to Olympias, the princess of Epirus, who is the mother of Alexander, helped him to secure his western frontier. Then in 357 BC, Philip angered Athenians when he took their settlement at Acropolis, sieged its gold and silver mines. He temporarily returned it to the city-states just to take it back later. Likewise, he had his own tactics. So in 356 BC, he conquered the northern Greek cities of Potidea and Pydna. In the same year, he conquered the western Thracian Crenids, to exploit new silver and gold discoveries in the mountain of Pagmaeus. He named it as Philippi by his name. And then Philip's power would come to a recognition when he became involved in sacred war. Importantly, then when Demosthenes, the renowned Athenian orator who constantly railed against Philip in a series of speeches known as Philippics, was constant thrown in Philip's during his rise to power and success throughout Greece. So, however, his heated speeches culminated in the War of Chaeronea in 338 BC. It was a battle that established Macedonian supremacy and control, and Philip and his son Alexander easily beat the united forces of Athens and Thebes. Eventually, then a Pan-Hellenistic Congress was held in Corinth, in which Spartan refused to come, to which Spartan refused to attend, and a peace was declared. With this establishment as the head of the Congress and his promise to secure the Greek cities, Greek colonies in Ionia, Philip began to plan for his invasions of Persia. But unfortunately, he was murdered while celebrating his daughter's marriage in 336. On his death, Alexander was quickly crowned as the king. So Alexander the Great, when it comes to his early days, when it comes to his early days, he studied under the Greek philosopher Aristotle from the age of 13 to 16, who sparked his interest in philosophy, medicine, and scientific inquiries. As a teenager, Alexander rose to fame as a combat. Alexander's military strength was first recognized in 338 during the Battle of Cheronia. Despite being only 18 years old, he played a key role in decisive Macedonian victory over the Greek allied city-states. So then in 334, Alexander went across to Asia Minor with a Macedonian force of 32,000 infantry and 5,100 cavalry to begin his conquest of Persian Empire. He defeated the Persians army headed by the satrap at the Battle of Granicus. Then in the same year, he liberated the cities of Sardis, Miletus, and Ephesus from Persian domination before moving on to the cities of Asia Minor. Then in 333 BC, Alexander and his troop defeated the large force of King Darius the Third of Persia at the Battle of Issos. And Alexander went to sack the Phoenician cities of Balak and Sidon, and which had surrendered in 332 BC. Then he laid siege to the island city of Tyre, which offered a desperate resistance before it was captured. For this stubborn resistance, the inhabitants of the city were slaughtered and the survivors sold into slavery. This policy regarding the cities of Tyre can be considered as a prime example of his ruthlessness. Then in 331 BC, he crossed into Egypt, where he found the city of Alexandria, which later became a major commercial center and a place of education. So it should be noted here, though he had conquered Egypt, he was not interested in imposing his own beliefs, behaviors upon the people, as long as they were willing to keep the supply line open to feed and equip the troops. So, but it does not mean that he did not ruthlessly suppress uprising or hesitate to viciously suppress those who opposed him. So that should be kept in your mind. So then in 331 BC, again he meets the King Darius III on the battlefield of Gogamia, which is also known as the Battle of Arbela. There, Alexander decisively beat Darius III, who retreated from the territory. Then Alexander went capturing Babylon, Susa, Persepolis, and Ecbatana, and was able to collect a vast amount of treasure. Then in 330 BC, Darius was assassinated by his own general and cousin Byssus. Hence, Alexander proclaimed himself as the king of Asia and continued with his conquest. He marched towards the region of modern-day Afghanistan. And in 329 BC, he defeated the Scythians at the northern border of the empire. He waged a campaign against Bactria and Sogdiana between 330 to 327. They were hard conflict like he had in every previous fight. Then Bessus was captured and put to the death for his betrayal of his former monarch, and it demonstrated that such betrayal cannot be ever tolerated. And after securely taking control of the Persian Empire in 327, Alexander turned his focus to India. Having heard the exploits of Alexander, the Indian king Emphis of Taxila submitted to his authorities without a fight. But some tribes strongly resisted in battles throughout 327 to 328. Alexander subdued these tribes by meeting King Porus of Porava at the Battle of Hadith's River in 328. Then, even though Alexander intended to march on and cross the river Ganges towards the further conquest, his troops worn out by the hard work fought Battle of Porus. So what he did was he divided his army in half, and he sent half back to the Persian Gulf through sea under the Admiral Narcus, and marching the other half through he himself marched towards Susa and reached it in 325. In Susa, he did something really interesting. He held a mass marriage service, which he married members. He made his members of his senior staff married to Persian princesses and noblemen, while he himself also married a daughter of the King Darius III. It was actually to further identify himself with the Persian loyalty. It should be noted that many of his troops object to his cultural merge and increasingly criticized his adoption of Persian dresses and manners. So, which he had promoted since 329 BC. They further objected to the promotion of Persians over Macedonia in the army and to Alexander's order of merging Persians and Macedonians unit. But however, Alexander responded by appointing Persians to prominent positions in the army and rewarded traditional Macedonian titles and honors to Persian units. So that is his reaction, how he reacted to all these oppressions, all of these criticisms. Eventually, he died at Babylon at the age of 32 in the year of 323, suffering 10 days of high fever. So, as a conclusion, I would say, although Philip is often only remembered for being the father of Alexander the Great, he was an accomplished king, military commander of his own right by settling the stages for his son's victory over Darius and the conquest of Persia, because he inherited a weak and a backward country with an ineffective disciplined army, but he molded them into a formidable and effective army. So if military force, in other words, effective military force, so that his son could achieve his conquests. Eventually, he subdued the territories around Macedonia as well as most of the Greece. He used bribery, warfare, and threats to secure his kingdom, but eventually he brought Macedonia to its supremacy. When it comes to Alexander, his campaign shows his military geniusness and his diplomatic skills in handling various populations of territories that he captured or conquered. And he further recognized for spreading Greek culture, language through thought from Greece throughout the Asia Minor, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and to India. Thus, he allowed for Hellenistic culture to be widespread. So these two characters, these two kings, brought Macedonia to supremacy. So that is the end of the discussion of these two kings. I hope you refresh your memory on Macedonian supremacy through this. Amanti, over to you.
Thank you very much, Consido. Okay, so I guess then we'll move on to our next topic, which is the conflict of psychological interests, a discussion based on Sophocles Philoctetes, and this will be done by Miss Bryony Ranasinghe. Bryony.
Thank you, Amanti. Let me just share my screen. So I'll be doing on the conflict of psychological interests in Sophocles Philoctetes, as mentioned by Amanti. And so I'm not going to introduce too much of it, because this is probably y'all's first introduction to Greek drama, and y'all probably know a lot about Sophocles by now. So I will not mention too much about Sophocles himself and go straight into the presentation. So I'm doing it in kind of two ways. I'll first talk about the psychological conflicts between the characters themselves, as in within them, their own minds, and then between the three different characters. So we start with Neoptolemus, who is the main character kind of in this play, because he's the one who goes through the most change and the most growth. And he is obviously the person who is prophesied to destroy Troy, and he's Achilles' son, which we all know. And it's mentioned many times during the play. So there are a lot of times when Neoptolemus actually talks about how difficult he's going to find it. He's going to be the person who destroys Troy. So because of that, he has to get Philoctetes to come to Troy with him. But still, we see him telling, I don't want to trick this man. I would rather use force. I would rather be like my father. Because that's like one of the main points of Neoptolemus's character. He wants to prove that he's worthy of being Achilles' son. And so when we look at this play, we always see, you're your father's son, being told by a lot of the characters. Odysseus says it, Philoctetes says it, and even he tells it, right? But still, as you can see, there is also this idea of, I need to win in him. And that is actually in conflict with his idea of, I need to be like my father as well. So that's why Odysseus actually kind of finds it easy at the beginning to persuade him to trick Philoctetes, because he's being pulled in this direction of, I need to win, I need to be the hero of Greece technically. And so that's one weird conflict that continuously happens throughout the play, So even within here he's going, even after he persuades Philoctetes to give him his bow, for instance, he's like, should I be doing this? What can I do? He questions himself constantly. Can I take this man's livelihood? Because that's what the bow means to Philoctetes. It's a means of living, and go and win a war. That's the kind of conflict that Neoptolemus is facing. Can I betray my conscience, or should I be concerned only with what I need to do, what I'm ordered to do? And so that's why when he comes to the end and he goes, justice is sometimes better than wisdom, you see Neoptolemus going closer to what is Achilles' character, what they always say is Achilles' character rather. And this is also one of Sophocles' precepts that is being voiced by Neoptolemus. Being wise is all well and good, but justice needs to prevail. And that is the point where the conflict comes to an end for Neoptolemus. I will be more just, I will be more sympathetic to a man's life than I will be towards the military and the war and my commander's orders, which is a weird idea, especially for an Athenian to have, but it's still something that comes through. So the next character we have is Odysseus. And Odysseus's question is actually a really problematic one in a way, right? Because this is a man who is known for his cunning and who had to be persuaded to come to Greece to Troy for the war, but still is following all the orders given to him by his generals. And we can see that he's actually having a conflict of guilt in a way, right? Because he is trying to, he's the one who left Philoctetes on this island of Lemnos. He's the one who basically abandoned a man to go to fight, and now he has to go and bring that man back because he can't win without him, right? And here you can see him persuading Neoptolemus, and he's really pushing for Neoptolemus to do this. And this raises an interesting question. Why is he making it Neoptolemus, right? Why is he not being the one to go and get Philoctetes? Why is he making Neoptolemus be the one? Because he's saying, remember, you're here to help me. I'm not going to do anything. It's all going to be you to Neoptolemus, basically. And so you're questioning, why is he doing that? And the reason is probably also fear, because he knows Philoctetes will try to kill him, but it's also because he's probably feeling really guilty. And this guilty is kind of warring with his own need to obey his commanders or to speak to his, or basically to do what needs to be done. And so what we see here is that conflict. And so there's a good counter argument that even you all can make here, which is, oh, but he knows that Philoctetes is going to kill him. He says the arrows will fly to kill, that never miss, basically. And you can see also Philoctetes trying to kill him. So he has a good reason not to be the person who persuades Philoctetes to come. And for that, I would like to present, because you all will need to do this for your A-levels also, when you all are making an argument, to anticipate the counter argument and to give an answer to it, to look at this last line. I'll not waste time with you, I'm going back. He basically gives up when Neoptolemus goes back to give the bow, right? He doesn't, you can see, he draws his weapon to fight and then he goes, no, I'm not going to do this. That's not the line, but that's the idea basically in it. And so when we see that, what we actually see is Odysseus, who is an experienced general, the most cunning man in Greece, is known for his cunning, is basically being half-hearted in his attempts to make Neoptolemus come back with the bow, right? He can't stop Neoptolemus going back and giving Philoctetes the bow. And that is the reason, and I believe that that's a great conflict of his own mind. He knows what he's doing is wrong. He's trying to do his duty. So when he's doing his duty, he's actually very half-hearted, because he could have overpowered Neoptolemus at any time. They were going to fight with swords, and Neoptolemus is not Achilles. He's not a master swordsman. Odysseus is a warrior. He's hardened by 10 years of war. He could have easily defeated Neoptolemus, but he's not. So you can see that half-heartedness, and that's where we can see actually his conflict. So then the final character is, of course, Philoctetes, the title character, right? So his wound is like a great source in the play because he's always complaining about it, always lamenting its pain. We see him when he gets into a fit because the pain is so much. And here, we know he wants to go. He doesn't want to stay on this island of Lemnos anymore, right? He's begging every single person to take him back home. He's like really pitiful. And besides that, the only other thing he wants only two things: to leave Lemnos and go home and heal him from his pain. But still, when he's presented with an opportunity to get healing, when Neoptolemus tells you come to Troy, so you're basically leaving that island and you're coming to Troy and you're getting relief. Your pain will be healed, your wound will be healed, you'll be happy, you'll be a warrior, you'll be a hero. And he doesn't want it, right? It's not so much a psychological conflict as he's having conflicting needs, kind of. He doesn't want his stubbornness, which is his core character trait, will not allow him to be saved, but it will also not allow him to fulfill his destiny. But still he keeps saying, I need to go back home to Malia to see his father. That's all he wants. And he wants to get relief from his pain. So he's to the end stubborn and he will not basically go to Troy. That's all he says. So he actually very emphatically says, I shall not set eyes on Troy for anything in the world. So that's why we get the Deus Ex Machina of Hercules coming, because it's not of this world, it's from the other world, basically. Yeah, from the world of the gods. And that is how we can see Philoctetes resolving that issue, like Sophocles resolving this issue of Philoctetes having to go to Troy. So this is the conflicts within the characters themselves, and between the characters, we have the conflicts of them following different courses of plans. For instance, the first plan we see is, of course, the Odysseus-Neoptolemus trickery plan, which causes the conflict between Neoptolemus's and Philoctetes' conversation. Because while Neoptolemus is tricking Philoctetes, we can see that their desires are supposed to merge, but in reality, they are not, right? Neoptolemus wants to go to Troy. He wants to be a hero, right? We can see it in his character as well. He wants to be the hero of Troy, and because that's what the Greeks want. They want honor in battle. And so he thinks Philoctetes should want this too. And that's the desire and the conflict between the two of them that comes into conflict, because Philoctetes doesn't want battle anymore. He just wants to go home. He wants relief from his suffering. So that's where the conflict in their desires come. Then there is, of course, when Neoptolemus returns the bow, which is like a physical kind of conflict, where in his mind, he's doing what is right. And Odysseus is doing what he thinks is right. He's obeying his commanders. He's basically being a good little soldier and doing exactly what the people want, and so the war can end. And here Neoptolemus is going like, I will listen to my conscience. I will go back with this bow. I will give this man his livelihood back, because that is what my father will do. And so that conflict is also visible because it's in their interest, basically. Because for Odysseus, the war ending is like the best thing that will ever happen to him. And for Neoptolemus, it's being like the father. And so that's another conflict that we have. So I will wrap up my session from there. And if you have any questions, I think you can answer it at the end at the Q&A. And over to you, Amanti.
Yes, thank you very much, Briony. Okay, so then we will move on to our sixth and the final session lecture for today, which is the first and the second Punic Wars, done by Miss Erandi Gunawardena. Erandi?
Yes, thanks, Amanti. Okay, so since you know me already, we'll take a look at the first and the second Punic Wars. Okay, now to do that, we'll just take a look at, we'll play a small game. This is just to help you with the MC Kids, right? The MC Kids section. So to play this very small game, it will only take about 2 minutes, I think, probably. So you can click on this link. Okay, hold on, you'll see the link in a second. It's about 7 MC kits, and we're going to use those MC kits, and I'll help you walk through the session with those MC kits we're going to take a look at. Okay, so you're going to go to this site called join.nearpod.com, right? You can use your phone, and I'll show you how it works on your phone, or you can use your device, right? And then, or else you can check the chat box and use the link in the chat box. Okay. See if I can put it on the chat box too. You can click on that link that I've sent in the chat box, or you can simply go to nearpod.com and type this code, right? I'll put up the code as well. I'll give you about 2-3 minutes maybe to join. So this is the code which you can type. And I'll show you how it works too. Avanti, do you mind? Can you make me a host?
Yeah, sure. 1 second.
You can start joining now, and once everybody joins, we can get started, okay? All right, thanks, Amanda. So I'll show you how it works on the phone. You will have to go to open up your phone, and you can go to this site called nearpod.join.com. Okay. And when you go to that, you click on join lesson. And then you can type the number. Here it's 7JLC is that, and you can join. Okay, that's how you can join, but I think we have reached the limit. So when you have reached the limit, some of you may not be able to do it, but that's okay. I'll share the questions with you. Okay. So I think most of you have already joined, so that's really good. So you can, what you can do next is to create your own avatar. So that is, you can create a small character for yourself, right? And those of you who are unable to join, that's okay. I'm going to share the questions with you on screen, right? So give me a second, I'll do that. Okay, so you'll see this, and then you can get started. So now you'll be put into this waiting room, right? So we can see that you're joining. You have selected your avatar. That's good. So I'll wait a couple of seconds to see, I'll wait for you all to join and get started, okay? Good. And those of you who are unable to join, that's perfectly all right. And don't worry, I'll be sharing the quiz on screen, and you'll be able to do it on your own, okay? So I'll wait for another minute to see. Okay, so I can see that you're joining from here, so that's good. Let's wait for another minute. All right, so I think this is the max that we can go to. It's 40 participants in total, but as I said, if you were not able to join using the link, that's okay, because you'll see the questions, okay? It's just that you might not be able to pick the answers when I show it on the screen, but you will still see the questions, all right? Okay, all right, so we're going to get started now. And you can pick the right answer. It's just to help you with the MCQ section that you have for the GRS exam, right? Okay, so we'll get started and you can pick the answer that you think is right. All right, good luck. So I forgot to say, you don't have to click the arrow that is on the left or right of your screen. It'll move on in 20 seconds. You'll have 20 seconds to answer each question, okay? And those who are unable to join using the link can take a look at the questions from here. You can see the questions here, okay? All right. Good job. So I think almost all of you got it right. So Carthaginians spoke Hebrew, not Carthaginian. Okay, good job. So this is the second one. Good job again. So Rome was not a strong naval power, but at that time, it was a military power. Okay, good. Now the next question, the third one. I think you all are doing really well. Very good. So it shows that you have studied. So it's the last one. It wasn't Hannibal's desire at that time. Okay. So that's the incorrect one. And this is the fourth question. The answer right there. So it's jealousy of Rome and the attack on Syracuse. Good. This is the fifth question. You can try that too. This should be C. It was Rome who won, got victory. So it's C answer. They didn't lose their supremacy. And this is the sixth one. We have two more to go. This is the sixth one. Okay, you can try that. Good job. I think almost all of you got that answer right. This is the next one. Again, very good job. It's ineffectiveness. His plan was good, but it couldn't be put into action. Okay, so excellent work. I think we should give a big clap to Tarushi and Sashini because you got all the questions right. So that's wonderful. And that's how you can, study. When you're studying, just attempt a few of the multiple choice questions, look at your past papers. So then you're prepared to answer any type of question that you get under any topic, okay? Right, excellent work. Thanks a bunch for joining, okay? Now let's get into these questions in detail, all right? So you can leave the Nearpod session now. It'll anyway stop, it'll automatically stop, or you can leave it. So that was excellent work, okay? All right, well done. So now let's take a look at these questions in detail. So first we need to take a look at, now this is a war between two great nations, right? We have Carthage, we have Rome. So Carthage was known for its wealth and resources, right? And its naval power. And we know that Hamilcar Barca, Hannibal, all these people were military geniuses, right? Whereas Rome had a strong military power, and you know that Carthage had paid soldiers, but Rome had a strong patriotic soldiers. They had loyal subjects, and they had a very strong government, which Carthage didn't have. So this was the situation of the two countries. They both had strengths and they had weaknesses, okay? Now, the reason why these two wars are important. Now, if you look at the first reason, for Rome, it was a life and death struggle because it was a very important war that showed them where they were. I mean, it gave, by the results of the war, could take away Rome's supremacy or could make Rome the supreme nation, right? So that's why it's a very important war that's why we study it, right? And it was also a contest between the East and the West. It also, now when you East and the West, meaning it also showed this war, the result of this war depended on the future of Europe, right? And because now, as in Mukherjee, what it says is that on the one side, it was the Aryan, that was the genius of the war, legislation and government. And on the other hand, the Carthaginians, they were spirit of industry, commerce, and navigation. So because of these four very important reasons, these Punic Wars are important for us to study. Okay, so we'll take a look at the first Punic War, and we'll take a look at the causes. We can't, of course, go into detail, but when you are studying, you can read Mukherjee thoroughly. But we'll be looking at the causes, the main events, and the individuals in the first and second Punic War. So we'll start with the first Punic War, which is from 264 to 241 BC. Okay. Now, the main reason here, now you can see that this is Carthage, Rome, and in between we have Sicily, right? Now, Sicily is the link between these two nations, right? Now, for the Greeks, there was some disunion among these Greek states, right? And all the other Greek states were jealous of Syracuse, okay, because it was here in the middle. Now, this was, these Sicily, Syracuse, they were very powerful Greek cities, okay? Now, the cause is this jealousy that the Carthaginians had, right? Because the Roman Republic was expanding, right? The Carthaginians were jealous, right? Now, this wasn't enough reason, as Amanti said, it's not a good enough reason. Jealousy is not a good enough reason to start a war. So now they were trying to see how they can come up with a reason to declare war against Rome, okay? So what happened was that the Mamertines, right, when they seized Messena and established themselves there, right, the king of Syracuse defeated these Mamertines and they were locked up in Messena, okay? So these Mamertines wanted help. So one group asked help from Carthage and the other group asked help from Rome, okay? So what Carthaginians did was that they sent a garrison to occupy Messena, and Romans now thought, now this is going to be dangerous to Italy. So what the Romans did was that they induced the Mamertines to expel the Carthaginians and instead to take a Roman garrison. Okay. Now this was a good enough reason for the Carthaginians to have common cause with the Syracusans, and with combined armies, what they did was they besieged Messena, right? Now, because of this, what did the Romans do? Romans declared war against Carthage when in 264 BC. Okay, so we have now if you look at the main events, right, we have 4 main events. We can divide the main events into 4 periods. Okay, the first period, if you sum it all up, right, we look at these periods in detail. But if you look at the first period, the most important thing you need to remember is that the Romans defeated Syracuse and Carthage. That is what happened in the first period. In the second period, we have to remember 2 very important names, Regulus and Xanthippus, right? So these 2, right, were defeated by the Carthaginians and they were taken as prisoner. So they were very important people in the second period of the Punic Wars. So in the third period, Consul Regulus died, okay? And the fourth period, what you need to remember is about the guerrilla warfare that was carried out by Hamilcar Barca for 3 years, right? But what happened at the end? It was a defeat. Carthaginians suffered defeat, okay, at Aegates. So these are the 4 periods you need to remember, okay? And the main incidents that happened during these periods are these. Now we look at this in detail, okay? Now in the first period, the Romans defeated the forces of Syracuse and Carthage together, right? And they moved on to besiege Syracuse, right? So now Syracuse got scared. They concluded a peace treaty with the Romans, okay? But then some Romans ended up besieging Agrigentum, right? So those are 3 main incidents that you can put under the first period, right? Then comes the second period. In the second period, Romans suffered defeat, right? It was a naval engagement at Lipara. And, but then, if you look at Duilius and Milos, they won, right? They won both the battles. They won the battle at Milos, but Lipara, they were defeated, but at Milos, they won, right? Now here is where you need to remember Regulus, right? Because Regulus, through his leadership, the Romans were able to defeat the Carthaginian fleet of Economus, right? And then in Africa, Regulus captured these two, Culpa and Tunis. These are two very important states. And then, so Carthaginians had no choice but to ask for peace. They sued for peace. And then Romans came up with some intolerable terms, okay? Because of that, because the Romans, the peace treaty was not really, terms were intolerable, the war continued, right? So when the war started continuing, Regulus was defeated by Xanthippus of Sparta, right? Who had taken service in the Carthaginian army, and then Regulus was taken, right, as prisoner, okay? And then comes the third period. In the third period, Romans again gained an important victory at Panomus, right, which was in 251 BC, okay? Again, the Carthaginians sued for peace, right? And Carthaginians, now Regulus was taken as prisoner, so he was released by the Carthaginians to bring peace, okay? Now Regulus observed all this and advised the Senate against peacemaking. He said, don't carry on the war, right? But then he ended up, he met with a cruel death at Carthage. And in the fourth period, Romans sought to reduce Libanium and Repanium, right? And they suffered a defeat at Repanium, and the whole fleet was destroyed by storm, okay? So this discouraged the Romans from continuing naval warfare. And then came Hamilcar Barca, right? So he became the head of the Carthaginian army, and he harassed the Romans by carrying what we call this guerrilla warfare for 3 long years, right? So with the guerrilla warfare, he was able to seize Eryx, and he held it for 2 years, okay? So because of this, the Romans desperately wanted to destroy the naval supremacy of Carthaginians, and they inflicted a crushing defeat on the Carthaginians at Aegates in 224 BC. That's how the fourth period ended, right? So these are 2 very important things that we need to remember. With this victory at Aegates, the Romans were able to cut off supplies from Libanian and Repanium and Eryx, okay? And they were able to reduce Carthaginians. They were able to starve the Carthaginians almost to death, okay? So then came the treaty. So in the treaty, there were 3 things that the Carthaginians had to do. So the first thing that they had to do was to evacuate Sicily and the adjoining islands. So they had to restore all the Roman prisoners without any ransom. And they also had to pay large war indemnity within 10 years, okay? And the results were that the whole of Sicily and Syracuse, which is the link between Carthage and Rome, Rome was able to take Sicily except Syracuse, okay? All that became a Roman province, and Carthage lost something very dear to them, which was their naval supremacy. So as a result, because of these results, Rome laid a solid foundation, right, of an empire. So Rome was a republic. So with the Carthaginian wars, Rome was able to become an empire, okay? So that marks the end of the first Punic War. Then there was a gap between the first and the second Punic Wars. There was a gap, right? Now here there are a couple of things that happened between the first and the second Punic Wars. So these two states, which were once Carthaginian, was a part of Carthaginian. Carthage was a part of Carthage, was taken over by the Romans. Sardinia and Corsica were taken over by the Romans. Then there was another war, small war, called the Illyrian War, right? And this brought Rome into direct communication contact with Greece, right? Then there was the Gallic Wars, right? With the Gallic Wars, Rome was able to extend their dominion up to River Po, and Rome's influence reached Alpha as well. And during this time, Rome was also able to, they found two colonies. One is called Placentum and then the Crimea, right? But now, while Carthage built an empire, right? So Carthage lost a lot of things. So Carthage was also working on building an empire and was trying to make up for all the losses she endured, right? So now Hamilcar Barca carried on the guerrilla warfare. So after that, his son Hannibal took over and he became the commander-in-chief, right? So now we'll take a look at the Second Punic War. Now we're also looking at the same thing. We're looking at the causes, the main events, and the individuals who were involved in the Second Punic War. We'll look at the causes first, right? We'll look at the importance of the Second Punic War first. Again, as we know, this now apart from this now, in the importance was that it was a contest. For Greek, it was a life and death contest. Now it has changed into a contest between a great man, who is Hannibal, and a great nation, Rome, right? And it was a struggle for bare existence for Rome, right? As we discussed, it's a life and death struggle, right? And with this, because by the end of this war, Rome can bring the whole of Mediterranean under her feet, okay? And Rome conquered the eastern powers, Macedonia, Greece, Syria, Egypt. So these are four very important reasons why the Second Punic War is important. Now to the real cause of the Punic War. So here the cause was revenge, right? So jealousy, revenge again are not really reasons for them to start a war. So they had to come up with an immediate cause, right? So here the cause was Hannibal's attack upon Saguntum, which was an ally of Rome within the sphere of Carthage, right? Because Hannibal attacked Saguntum, Rome started a war with Carthage, okay? But the true intention was for Carthage to take revenge on the Romans for all the losses, especially Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica, right? And also the other, the results of the First Punic War was, it took away the commerce. They built up their commerce extremely well, but they lost all that, right? So that was also another reason for them to take revenge, right? And this attack upon Saguntum became the immediate cause. So Hannibal carefully planned the attack, and there were two very important parts in his plan. One was that he wanted to strike the heart of the enemy, so that is Italy, from the north, right? Because then he thought that they will not be well prepared if they attack the heart of the enemy. And his other plan was to win over the newly conquered Gauls and the Italian allies of Rome, right? So by winning their trust, he thought he will be able to take these allies to their side, right? To Hannibal's side. So those were the two, these were the plans that Hannibal had to attack Rome, okay? And Hannibal had a well-planned route. So you can see that he started here, okay? And then you can see he continued to River Ebro, and from there to River Rhone, and from there to the Alps, and that's how he came to Carthage, right? So this is the route that Hannibal followed, okay? And we have three important battles, right? We'll look at these battles now, right? That's how he marched to Italy, okay? So we'll see the important events in the first period, 280 to 216 BC. His focus was on Italy, right? Hannibal's focus was on Italy. The second period, 216 to 207, his focus was on Italy, Spain, and Sicily. And the third period, we'll take a look at that in detail, okay? But these are the three periods we need to remember under the Second Punic War, okay? In the first period, Hannibal won at these two cities, areas, right? Ticinus and Trebia, and he was able to get the Gauls to his side, right? Which is again a very important victory, right? So this victory, right, at the Tresemme Lake this enabled Hannibal to destroy the entire Roman army. Okay. Now comes this another very important figure we need to remember is Fabius Maximus. Okay, so he was given the command of the Roman army, and he adopted this very important policy called caution and delay, which was not improved, but with his approach, right, he was able to, later on we see how important his policy was, right? So his policy was not advanced approved, right? So because of that, the Romans were defeated at Cannae in 216 BC, right? And the consuls that we need to remember were Varro and Paulus, right? So under their leadership, under these two consuls, Romans suffered defeat, okay? Then the Carthaginians went to Capua, which was their winter quarters, okay? There in Italy, this is where the mistake happened, right? So the soldiers, the Carthaginian soldiers became demoralized because they were in a city, there was plenty of food, corn for them to eat, women, all that was there. So the soldiers became demoralized. Then the Fabian policy of caution was taken into action, okay? So Hannibal failed to take Cannae and Neapolis, right? But he did obtain a victory over these two consuls, right? But then another shock to the Carthaginians was the death of Hasdrubal, right? So Hasdrubal was coming to help Hannibal, right? But then he was killed on his way, which shattered Hannibal's hopes of conquering Rome. And it also compelled him to abandon his plans, right? In Sicily, Syracuse fell, right? And then a whole of Sicily was subjugated, right? And in Spain, P. Cornelius Scipio was able to capture New Carthage. He defeated Hasdrubal and then formed an alliance with Massinissa, right? The king of Western Numidia, okay? And at Gadea, it was the last stronghold of the Carthaginians. And in the third period, Cornelius was together with Massinissa defeated the combined forces of Hasdrubal and Syphax, the king of Eastern Numidia. Okay. And then eventually Hannibal was also defeated at the Battle of Zama, which is again an important battle. Okay. And then there was nothing. Carthaginians couldn't continue any further, and they had no choice but to sue for peace, right? So now we have the terms of peace. Here, the Carthaginians were allowed to retain African territories, but all the other things, including foreign possessions, they had to give them all up, okay? And Carthaginians were not allowed to make any war without Rome's consent, right? Carthaginians had to surrender all her ships, right? Except 10, they were told they could keep 10, but all the prisoners and deserters, all that, they had to surrender, okay? And they also had to pay a heavy war indemnity within 59 years, okay? Now we're looking at the results. I'll walk you through the results now. And these results are extremely important, okay? Because apart from political and economic results, Rome was able to bring the whole Mediterranean under her feet, right? So these Punic Wars, after the Second Punic War, Rome was able to become an imperial power. Okay, if you look at the political results, the power of the Roman Senate increased, right? And Roman citizenship became exclusive. Okay, and in terms of economic results, the rural areas started. So all the people started moving to urban areas. So there was a problem with depopulation, and slave labor increased. Okay, right. So those are the three very important under the results. That these are three important sections we have to remember. Okay. Now let's take a look at what actually caused Hannibal's failure. He was an he was a military genius, but why did he fail, right? So one reason was that Romans were determined, right? They didn't give up. And then the second reason was that all the Roman allies were faithful, especially Latin, whereas Carthage didn't have that of, they had their subjects were not, they were discontent, they weren't happy, right? And the other important reason for Hannibal's failure is that his brother died. He was defeated, Hasdrubal was defeated at the Battle of Macedonia, and this caused and this shattered all his, Metaurus, and this shattered all Hannibal's plans, okay? And there was no way Hannibal could get any support from the government after the defeat of his brother Hasdrubal, okay, at the Battle of causes why Hannibal's plans were not successful, okay? But Hannibal was an important figure because of his plans. They were bold. They would have been successful if not for those reasons that we looked at, right? He was a good leader, and he did defeat the Romans on several occasions, right? And he is regarded as a statesman, okay? So these are some of the reasons that make Hannibal, that's why we still talk about him, that he is, and that we consider him a military genius because of these reasons, okay? All right, so that's about it. You will have to go through these periods in detail, but if you do have any questions, you can leave them to the end. I think we have already come to the end, okay? So I'll hand it over to Amanti and